We're just about there. Okay, we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome, everyone. Particularly, I understand we have some students here tonight from the Charter High School. Is that right? Well, observe carefully and learn well. Hopefully, we'll have something today that you'll find interesting. First item on the agenda is item 3A, approval of the minutes on November 12, 2015. Do we have any motion with respect to the minutes?
Move to approve.
That was Dr. Day. Second, Ms. Rednow, or Ms. Calderon. And any discussion? All in favor signify by aye. Aye. Any opposed, like sign? Hearing none, that motion carries. Next item on the agenda is a consent item. It is quasi-judicial. It's item 4A. And I'll go ahead and read it into the record. It's the Parker Accessory Single-Family Dwelling request for administrative permit use approval for an accessory single-family dwelling unit. Carlin and Valerie Parker are the owner agent. It's located at 13755 85th Street. The zoning is A1 agricultural up to 1 unit per 5 acres. The land use designation is AG1 agricultural up to 1 unit per 5 acres. As I said, this is quasi-judicial. I will ask all of the commissioners if you've had any ex parte communications, site visits, investigations, or if there's any other reason why you cannot address this matter and decide it upon the facts and the law. Anybody have anything to report? If not, do you have any questions you'd like to ask staff about this item? Any member of the commission? If not, does any member of the public want to be heard on this item? Okay, do we have a motion then with respect to this item?
I'll move a motion.
Okay, Mr. Rednow, and you're moving approval of staff's recommendation?
Yes.
Okay, we do have a motion, Mr. Rednow. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second, Mr. Stewart. Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by aye. Aye. Any opposed, like sign? Hearing none, that motion carries unanimously. The next item on the agenda is also quasi-judicial. It is not a consent item. It is item 5A. I'll go ahead and read it into the record. It's Arcadia, request for preliminary plat approval for a 79-lot single-family subdivision. Arcadia Vero Beach LLC is the owner. Schulke Biddle and Stoddard LLC is the agent. It's located on the south side of 37th Street between 58th Avenue and 66th Avenue. The zoning is RS3, residential single-family up to 3 units per acre. The land use designation is L1, low density 1, up to 3 units per acre. The density of the project is 2.01 units per acre. Again, it's quasi-judicial. We'll start by asking if anybody's had any ex parte communications, site visits, investigations, or has any other conflict or reason why they cannot consider this matter based upon the evidence in the law. Any commissioner have any matter to report? No. If not, why don't we go ahead and ask anybody who plans to testify in this matter to please stand and be sworn in by the clerk.
Do you swear and affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Okay, we will go ahead and open the hearing. And Mr. Bowling, you and your staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Sweeney will present this item.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. For the record, I am Ryan Sweeney, Senior Planner with the Indian River County Planning Division. Tonight we have an application for a preliminary plat for the Arcadia subdivision. A brief comparison to a previous approval, previous project of Vero Village and the current project Arcadia. Vero Village was a similar subdivision, proposed a total of 83 lots on 39.35 acres at a density of 2.11 units per acre. The, construction never commenced with that project, and the approval for that project has since expired. The current project, Arcadia subdivision, features a similar design layout, but for only 79 lots, and it's at a density of 2.01 units per acre. The subject site is located on the south side of 37th Street, in between 58th Avenue and 66th Ave. The Harmony Reserve PD is located to the east, the Sanctuary PD to the south, and the Oak Chase Conventional Subdivision to the west. Here is an aerial depicting the existing conditions of the site. As noted in the staff report, there was a single-family home as well as some accessory agricultural buildings. The single-family home has since been removed. The agricultural buildings will be removed during site development. You can see in the aerial the old grove furrows. This was a citrus property as well as some cattle pasture land that will be developed into the subdivision. Here is a graphic of the proposed preliminary plat showing the lot configuration and the infrastructure layout. It also depicts the proposed phasing of the project, with phase 1 being essentially the east half of the project and phase 2 being the west half of the project. Each phase will either has been designed to stand on its own or in conjunction with the previous phase. The traffic circulation plan features a gated two-way full connection driveway connection to 37th Street, as well as an internal loop road and a very short cul-de-sac segment in the central portion of the project. The stormwater plan depicts the essentially a centralized stormwater tract, and that will outfall somewhat into the wetland preservation tract at the southeast corner of the project. The landscape plan depicts the required 25-foot wide Type B buffer along 37th Street. There's really any additional buffering on the perimeter. However, there will be some additional wetland mitigation, as brought up in the staff report. Approximately 0.61 acres of low-grade wetlands will be impacted during site development, and 0.62 acres will be mitigated within the wetlands preservation tract. And dedication improvements and other conditions. There again is the requirement for the 37th Street buffer along the south side or along the north side of the project. Internal sidewalks required per the code provision, which essentially allows segments of the sidewalk to be developed as each unit is built. Street lighting is a required improvement. Green space and recreation area for residential projects, and this, for the most part, is a passive recreation use. That is the wetland tract. There will be a scenic lookout provided in that area, and the wetland preservation area itself. And with that, staff recommends that the PZC approve preliminary plat for the Arcadia subdivision with the conditions listed in staff's report, including a final landscape and tree mitigation plan, final street lighting design, a Calian wetland resource permit for the impacted wetlands, and the internal sidewalk requirement. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments by members of the commission? Is the applicant here? Yes. Does the applicant have any questions of the county staff?
No.
Does the applicant wish to make a presentation?
I'll just make it very brief. Chuck Mecklin, I represent the ownership group. And it's just a very simplistic RS3 straight-up zoning. We decreased from the original plan that was approved by the county previously, and we've got the wetland preservation, which will make that a very unique piece back in there. Also creates a nice buffering effect between us and the sanctuary, and so none of the people that have been used to enjoying some of that beauty will have that taken away from them. So we also have the RS3 zoning accommodating to the western sector with the Oak Chase subdivision over there. So light zoning, and I appreciate your time. I'll answer any questions if you have any.
Any member of the commission have any questions? County staff have any questions of the applicant? I'm sorry, Dr. Day, yes.
Yeah, I noticed that the preserved wetland is transferred over to the Property Owners Association for maintenance. What does that maintenance involve?
Well, we would keep that in accordance with the St. John's Water Management, where in our covenants we've worked with them in regards to the preservation and maintenance of that. So that would be in the covenants for the community.
And do they make inspections periodically, or how does 5 years down the road, how do we know that the maintenance is being done?
And that one, I'm not clear if the St. John's comes out all the time. I think that if there was something that was amiss with the community, that there would certainly be residents that would be concerned, and the St. John's would undoubtedly get a phone call. But I think that the projects that we've been involved with over the years, that the quality and the care taken will be written into the covenants so that it'll be a byproduct of the community for the preservation and the maintenance of that.
So do they remove exotics? So Brazilian pepper that comes in, do they remove them?
Well, yes, sir. Any of the exotics out there will be removed. That's part of the agreement or understanding with the county to go through our landscape plan, and the regular maintenance of any exotics would be part of the overall maintenance of the community as well.
Mr. Bowling?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Stan Bowling, Community Development Director. In terms of the maintenance, I think what will be apparent is during the inspection at the end of the project, we'll see that all the regulations are in compliance for the way they've set things up. And Mr. Meckling's right. In terms of maintenance, it'll either be St. John's people looking at it, occasionally county staff looking at it, or complaints. There'll be protections in terms of clearing. And in terms of long-term sort of maintenance, what we tend to get are property owners associations working with St. John's and with staff if they get a lot of cattails, that type of thing in there. So there probably are maintenance activities many years out in terms of that to periodically do that, and that's really done in coordination with St. John's and county staff.
Yeah, I was more interested in the cattail invasion because that can produce a heck of a mosquito problem.
Yeah.
So that's important.
And what we tend to find is that property owners associations, years out, they're interested in cattail removal as well. So it kind of works hand in hand that way.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments by commissioners? Either the applicant or the county have any further comments or statements? Any member of the public wish to be heard on this? If not, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. The record will consist of the evidence presented plus the materials that you received with your agenda package today. Ladies and gentlemen of the commission, what's your preference?
Move to approve with staff's recommendations.
Okay, that was Dr. Day. And do we have a second?
I'll second it.
We have a second, Mr. Rednauer. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor of the motion, please signify by aye. Aye. Any opposed by like sign? Hearing none, that motion unanimously carries. Okay, that brings us to item 6 on the agenda. It's a public hearing matter. I'll go ahead and read it into the record. It's an ordinance of Indian River County, Florida, amending the text of Policy 5.7 of the potable water sub-element and Policy 5.8 of the sanitary sewer sub-element of the county's comprehensive plan and providing codification, severability, and an effective date. This is a legislative matter. And Mr. Bowling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rohani is going to present this item.
Okay.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Sasan Rohani, Chief of Long Range Planning. We have I believe, a simple comprehensive plan text amendment in front of you today. And overall, the comprehensive plan amendment itself is a very involved process. Usually from the beginning to the end would take about 7 months. First, the application was submitted to staff. When it's completed, we would come before you in a public hearing like we are tonight. You are going to make a recommendation to the Board of the County Commissioner. Then we go to a public hearing before the Board of County Commissioner for transmittal. And if the board decides to transmit it, then we send the amendment to all the state and regional review agency. They would make a comment on the amendment. After that, we receive their comment. We go to a final public hearing before the Board of the County Commissioner. And if the board approves the amendment, then we would transmit it for a second time to all the state and regional review agency. And after 31 days of the approval of the board, then amendment become effective. That's why it usually takes about 7 months because there is 3 public hearings and 2 times we have to send everything to the state and review agencies. The purpose of the amendment tonight is to amend 2 policies of the comprehensive plan. One is policy 5.7 of the potable water sub-element, and the other one is policy 5.8 of sanitary sewer sub-element. What we are doing tonight, in that policy there are some exemption for some of the property outside the urban service area that they could connect to centralized water and sewer, and we are adding that the place of worship and camp and retreat be added to those exemptions if they are outside the urban service area. This particular amendment actually initiated by the Board of the County Commissioner on request by some of the property owners that they are in 12th Street west of 58th Avenue. And with the current requirement of those 2 policies that I mentioned, they cannot connect to the water and sewer, and that is the reason that we're going through this amendment, because as you know, the comprehensive plan has the force of the law, and even if something sometimes looks good and is good, we cannot do it unless it conforms with the comp plan. And if somebody wants to do something that it makes sense, we have to go through the process, we have to amend our plan, and then they could do it. This is basically the area that show the subject property, and again there are 2 property here. One is a church right here, and then one is a campground and a retreat right here, and they're the one that they want to connect. And of course there is an existing agricultural industry. With the current policy they could connect, but however, they are agreeing with the other 2 parties because they want to share the cost. Therefore, all 3 of them, they want to connect and share the cost. With the current policy, we had this policy since we adopted our plan in 1990, and we are saying that centralized water and sewer should be provided inside of the urban service area, and that is where the urban development would happen. Residential development, commercial, industrial, institutional, and that is mainly where the water and sewer should be available. However, we have some exemption that some of the projects that they are outside the urban service area, they could also connect to the centralized water and sewer. And one of them is a cluster development, like the Newton or AgPDs. These are the form of the development that the county would really prefer, that they are clustered instead of individual lot here and there. The other one is for public facilities, like if there is a school outside the urban service area, we allow the school to connect to the regional water and sewer system. The other one is for agricultural businesses. Sometimes they're processing food and so forth that they need the good water to do that. Also, if there is a private well contamination, we would allow them to connect. The last one is the properties that they are within 500 feet of the existing main loop system. Even though if they're outside the urban service area, they could connect. This current policy had 2 provisions that I would like to bring to your attention. Even though that we would allow those policy, those properties, those uses outside the urban service area to connect, but policy is very explicit that these connection, there is no justification for density increase. We would allow them to connect based on what they are, what use they are, and how they're located, but because the water and sewer is available to them, there is not justification to come and say, okay, now I have a water and sewer, I would like to increase the density. And this is part of the policy and is going to stay part of the policy. Also, the applicant has to pay for all the costs associated with this connection.
Well, Mr. Rahani, before you go on to the next slide, could you go back to the prior slide which showed the properties and the location? Yeah.
Yes.
What's that facility down in the lower right-hand corner? I assume that's the southeast.
This one here?
Right.
Oh, this is the First Church of God. And they're already connected because they are within 500 feet of the urban service area.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could just say, Again, this policy change is not site-specific. It is countywide, but we did want to give you the background on the particular properties because they might be discussed. And I think Sasan was mentioning that the urban service area boundary in this particular location is 58th Avenue and First Church of God, and there's also Masters Academy School that's part of that 40-acre campus. So they already meet criteria to allow connection, and they've been connected for a number of years.
Do you allow it to keep connecting, going out? I know you don't increase the density, but the people further out can keep connected?
Well, in terms of this policy needs to be changed in order for those other uses because they don't have big sites that are adjacent to the urban service area boundary, this exception that's being proposed and is before you tonight would be needed to just allow them to do that. Now, the manner in which they do that is a whole other issue. The policy change is an allowance under the comp plan, but then there's the next and very important kind of engineering and design and system step of what they would actually need to do to expand the system to get water and sewer to their sites. That's the part that staff described in the ordinance that's essentially an agreement that utility services works out.
But if I wanted to open a church on the other side and then another church and another church and another, I could just keep connecting.
Okay. Again, if they meet the criteria of the exception, yes. But just, somebody because they're outside of the line, they want to connect, they cannot connect unless meet one of these criteria. Yes, you're right. If there's going to be another church or another campground, yes, they could connect.
But another church can't unless we amend the policy right now.
Exactly. Right now, as it is, the churches and the camp and the retreat area, they cannot connect
The only way
under
they
the
keep going
current
out
policy.
is if they fall into an exception. Each one has to keep falling into an exception.
Yeah.
Yeah, or clustered housing or, et cetera, agricultural.
But you can never increase the density on that property.
Correct.
Okay. For the county, since 1990, when we developed our plan, urban service area is very important because this is the area that actually all the urban development happen. And it is very important for the utilities department to know where that area is because they could plan for that area. They have a defined area that they know where they need to provide water and sewer. Then they could schedule for efficient function for that area. They could say what kind of improvement they need, what kind of maintenance they need, what kind of quality of water they need, and so forth. Because it's a confined area, they could do that. But if we just extend the water and sewer outside the urban service area, then they don't have that luxury anymore. They don't know where this one go. That's why the urban service area always was very important, and that's why this exemption that we have, they are very specific, and it still, would maintain that efficiency of the system without really spreading the water sewer everywhere outside the urban service area. Again, with the current policy, the type of the uses that they connect are the one that preferred, like as I said, like a Newton or Ag PDs, if there is a health and contamination issue, and if they are within 500 feet of the system. But again, the rationale is that, first of all, we really would like, the agriculture area to develop as a cluster. We don't want, single family here and there and so forth. That's one thing. The other one is a health and safety issue. Like for something like a church or campground that we have lots of people aggregate at some place, they need a fire protection and also they need a good water. And it's very important this day and age to actually connect to the sewer instead of having the septic tank. That's why, there are also some non-residential use outside of the urban service area that they could connect. With the current policy, again, as I mentioned earlier, it would make sure that we don't have low volume, high maintenance line all around outside the urban service area. Utilities department, of course, they tell us all the time, when there is a lots of use and when there is a loop system, the quality of the water would be maintained. But when they don't have that one, if you have a single line going for a mile outside the urban service area with a low volume use, that quality cannot maintain. Therefore, what they need to do, periodically, they need to go and flush the system. This costs money and also good water that they need to be wasted in order to do that one. That's why, we want to make sure that what they do is still keep the efficient system. Proposed amendment, again, I'm emphasizing here, would only add 2 exceptions to the current policy for the place of worship and for the camp and retreat area. But still we would maintain the other requirement, and this is again very important, that connecting to the county water and sewer is not a justification for density increase, and also the owner developer has to pay all of the cost. In practice, they would, if somebody is like a church or retreat, they're outside the urban service area, they go to our utilities department, they apply for permit, utility department makes sure that there is capacity available, and then they look at the design and specification and see if that would make sense, if they still could keep the system efficient and good quality of water, and therefore they could go ahead with the, approving the permit. Also, how far they are from the existing water line and how many people involved and so forth. These all has the factors that would be, again, affecting if they could provide the water or not, if it's feasible, if it's cost feasible. Again, as I mentioned, again, this is a comprehensive plan amendment, and any comprehensive plan amendment, it has to be consistent with the entire comprehensive plan. One of the most important policy when we are amending a plan is that policy 14.3, that one of these 4 criteria should be happen in order for us to amend the comp plan. If either was an oversight in an approved plan, it was a mistake, it was a change of circumstances, or was swap of the land for the land use amendment. In this case, we really think it was an oversight, because originally when we put this policy in the plan, we really didn't think that there are some uses that could be approved outside of urban service area, like a church and camp retreat, that would bring the people together, would assemble the people together. And when you have those people assembled, again, it's a really good idea to have the fire protection. It's a very good idea to have a good water, drinking water, and also it's a good policy to connect to the sewer versus a septic tank. And that's why we think that it meets the first criteria of this policy, and overall, this requested amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Based on the analysis, staff recommend that you recommend the Board of the County Commissioner to approve the amendment. Of course, again, as I said, it would go to the PCC, Board of County Commissioner, for transmittal, and then in the second public hearing that they would have, that is the approval. I'm happy to answer any question that you might have.
Any member of the commission have any questions of Mr. Rahani? I do have several questions. First of all, do our land development regulations, the comp plan, et cetera, define either the term camp or retreat or camp/retreat?
Right. The comprehensive plan does not have a section of definitions. Our land development regulations do. And we have a definition of place of worship, essentially a traditional, a church, a synagogue, a mosque that has religious services and kind of an office typically, and has regular services and activities that are religious in nature. We don't have a definition in our LDRs of camps or retreats. We have criteria and look at characteristics. Overnight sleeping and camping, basically lodging, recreational activities also characterize it, and large percentage of the site being dedicated to open space type of uses. Those are all characteristics of a camp and retreat, and that comes out of our special criteria for camps and retreats, like the one known as Epic Missions.
Second question, how exactly does staff define or interpret the oversight concept in the amendment of the comprehensive plan? In other words, it seems to me at some juncture you can say, yeah, pretty much anything we want to add, was an oversight because, it's not there because of an oversight. Are there any criteria that are typically applied in defining when an oversight occurs within the context of our plan?
I guess you're asking, are there criteria for that criterion that's in place? And you're right, that one is broad, and it's somewhat similar to change in circumstances. We look at the two like this. The change in circumstances would be something that's really different out on the ground, or it could even be, because of technology or something, a new kind of use that was not contemplated that arises. But in terms of oversight, I think what we're looking at here is literally a policy, whether to change a policy or not. And I think in this case, the board has found that we didn't think about fire protection and potable water for certain places of worship or places of assembly like camps and retreats and churches, and we want to allow that for them. And we didn't look at that, accommodating that type of use, specifically when we went through 700 policies in the comprehensive plan. I would also say that when we did the last exception in 2013 to these policies, the looped line, where we have some major looped lines that go through the outside urban service area, outside the urban service area, not even adjacent to the boundary, our board came to the same conclusion that it was an oversight. We didn't think about looped lines that are going through rural areas and whether the line's already there, should people be able to connect or not. So, I mean, it is a criterion that we've looked at. We don't have any definitions associated with it. We just make a judgment.
Am I interpreting the minutes of the October, I think it was 13 meeting correctly, that at that meeting staff recommended against this change?
That's correct.
Okay.
We did. We had our major concern really at that juncture was the effects on the system itself, the utility system. And we look at if we have dead end lines with either very low density or low volume users, there could be some adverse ramifications for that. But it is a matter of degrees. The more exceptions you have, the less the rule holds. So I think it's really kind of a perspective of what is appropriate, what do we need to accommodate. I will say that in this particular case where we think somebody's interested in applying this exception if it's approved, you happen to have multiple users rather than just one user coming together and extending a system and getting more use out of that extended line because you have multiple users. So I think in practice what's going to happen is that the utilities department, when they're looking at an extension, are going to be looking at the volume of the use and the use of the line itself on essentially a case-by-case basis.
If we approve this, how do we distinguish churches and camp/retreats from any other business or activity where people come together, where fire protection and good water and sewer is presumably important to anybody?
Yeah.
How do we say yes to these uses and no to those uses? Or have we opened the door that we're going to have to pretty much open it to any use where people come together?
Right, good question. Are we really setting a precedent or not? Right now we're looking at, if you look at the exceptions, we have the rationales for all the exceptions that are in there now, including agricultural businesses and agricultural industries. They are uses that are allowed, and there's a good reason for allowing them outside the urban service area. They're serving agricultural uses and they're in an agricultural area. That doesn't mean that every one of them gets connected to water or sewer. Most of them don't. Most of them are on well and septic systems. But we do have an allowance for those. When you're talking about non-residential uses, I think the camps and retreats and churches are types of uses that are allowed outside the urban service area. And I think the direction here is if you've got a place of assembly type of use like that, you should accommodate it. But I don't know of other types of places of worship uses that are allowed out in the agricultural areas where you'll have that.
Basically, also, like another place that have assembly of the students or the schools, that schools are also allowed outside of the urban service area that our current policy would allow them to connect. At this point, I cannot think of any other type of use that could be allowed outside the urban service area that have that characteristic of assembling the people beside the school, the churches, and camp and retreats.
Would a daycare be
Yeah,
permitted
that's my thinking, too.
to connect? A daycare?
Daycare, I don't know if that would fall under the school or not. That's one I'm not sure.
No, I
Is
don't-
that permitted outside the services
They,
area?
they are allowed outside.
Okay.
The urban service
To
area.
me, that's a valid comparison. You know, why would you allow a church and not a child care facility?
The person that wanted to have that wedding, the person that wanted to have the wedding place out west, and that's a retreat, and it was family retreats, and it just keep going, you know?
Oh, certainly you, again, I think we're looking at the kinds of uses that we get outside the urban service area where you have places of assembly. And I can think of one daycare that's outside the urban service area that actually has water, has county water, because they've met one of the exceptions in the past. So, but yeah, you're correct. I mean, you could conceivably have a remote daycare facility, and then the question would probably fall to whether it would be feasible or not to run lines out to it.
It strikes me that, when we talk about adopting legislative policy applicable throughout the whole county, we would normally take a fairly broad look at what uses are served by doing that and what uses aren't. In this case, it appears to me what we've done is you've got an agricultural property down the street that has the right to connect, and it just so happens that between that agricultural property and the urban services boundary line are a church and a camp/retreat. And because they want to share the cost, suddenly we're addressing churches and camp/retreats, which to me, the coincidence of whatever happened to be next to this agricultural piece of property is not a real strong basis to start adopting countywide policies. To me, it's driven by a coincidence in a single circumstance. I get the feeling that if there were a child care facility there, we'd be talking today about an exemption for child care facility. Am I wrong? Or, are we here today just because of that the agricultural property wants to move forward, and it happens to have these two pieces of property next to it with those uses?
Yes and no. You're right and you're wrong. I can't tell you what.
Better than I usually do. So
yeah, it's pretty good. At least 50-50. I think the discussion of where the urban service area boundary and who can connect and can't connect will be an ongoing discussion. I don't see any end to the considerations, but it was a specific example that brought this to the board's attention, and they gave us the direction to accommodate these uses with the connection policy. And that's essentially where it is. So I think it was a specific example that brought this to the attention of the board.
Other questions or comments?
And I kind of following up on what you said, the language is in the amended, the Appendix A, the 2 Appendix A, the language is very specific, where the language changes, or where a place of worship or camp retreat is approved for water and or sewer service. And on your presentation, you had, on the presentation it was place of worship or camp retreat, and then in parentheses, places of assembly were in that. And so that made it, this is very narrow, and I wondered about that. It is very narrow, focusing on places of worship and camp retreat, whereas in your presentation it broadened it out a little bit, so it perhaps would include a daycare. So I wonder about the narrow language in this amended change.
Right, and you're correct. The wording that's in the amendment itself is what matters, and we characterize these two specific uses as uses that have a place of assembly, and it's not just a small assembly. Churches and retreats tend to have large numbers of people assembling, and that's how we were characterizing it. But you're correct. We've tried to keep this amendment very, very narrow, and that's why we just called out those two, and only those two uses. And they are allowed in the agricultural zoning districts.
So if down the line, we end up with the same thing with a daycare requesting it, we'll be back here talking about adding daycare to the language.
So are you asking me what are the odds of that?
Eventually.
I think the board
maybe
could,
something else that we haven't envisioned.
You're exactly right. The board could look at that and say, that's it, and perhaps it depends on size or number of people that are involved, because you can meet fire protection standards and drinking water standards and septic, and you can meet state standards to have those uses without water or sewer. But you're correct. I mean, the board could direct us at some point in time to allow that or not. It is a policy decision.
Or you could make a recommendation to the board one way or another.
Well, how important is the specific language to you? How important is it that this read places of worship and camp or retreat? And could you broaden it out like you did in your presentation and say places of assembly?
No, I think you would have to. I think you would have to change the language. I mean, right now the way that the language is structured to be narrowed to just those two uses. I think if there were a recommendation to go forward to any use that had an assembly of people, we'd probably have to define that. We have enough definition, I think, of place of worship and camp retreat that we know what those use categories are.
Other questions or comments to staff? If not, let's go ahead and open the public hearing, and anybody who would like to address the commission, please step to the podium, give your name and address, and let us know what's on your mind.
My name is Deborah Ecker. My residence is 550 Rio Mar Drive in the city of Vero Beach, and I am speaking on behalf of the Indian River Neighborhood Association. The most important point that I wish to make in my statement to your commission is our organization's support for this county's 2030 comprehensive plan. In particular, this was developed as long ago as 1990, and we particularly support the whole concept of a designated urban service area. The proposal before you is destructive to the purpose and administration of this good zoning policy. As stated in the comprehensive plan, the designation of this area of an urban service area provides the county with an effective administrative and cost-saving boundary for the geographic area for which it is obligated to provide services. The proposal before you, put forward as an oversight in the designation of the boundary, could make it difficult, if not impossible, for your commission or the Board of County Commissioners to deny any future applications. We need to review what the county's comprehensive plan states about urban area service areas. Quote, the USA provides an important function in directing urban and rural development to appropriate locations, to property inside the urban service area. In so doing, the plan ensures that infrastructure investments are made in an efficient and cost-effective manner. We all can assume that granting these implications will be just the beginning of an erosion of this principle. What criteria, what reason will your commission or the Board of County Commissioners have to deny any future quote, oversights? There's nothing about the proposed approval that would give you a reason to, in fact, this is precedence. There's no precedence here for you to deny anything else, a movie theater, a laundromat, whatever, a mall. Yet another problem that we see with the approval of this application is that it would result in the provision of water services, but there's no mention of the applicant's obligation to mandate to connect with sewer services if they are as nearby as water mains, or if they become so in the future. Our objection to this methodology is so strong that we raise the following question. And essentially we're suggesting, if you can't bring yourselves to say no to this, would you consider an alternative? And here's the alternative that I'm just suggesting that you might consider. And that is that you ask the planning department to review whether this neighborhood in which these properties are located, whether they expect in the near future for it to be more densely developed and to be more urban than rural. And therefore, would it be more reasonable for the urban service boundary to be moved rather than to exempt two specific types of properties because they were oversights? It strikes us that it would be considerably less unreasonable for the urban service boundary to be moved than to provide specific exemptions. In conclusion, the proposed exemption to the comprehensive plan presents your commission with an extremely troubling and potentially dangerous challenge to the county's good zoning and land use planning. This would erode the integrity of the major land use control that Indian River County now has for the appropriate expenditure-controlled provision of county services. So again, we ask that you deny this application, or at the minimum, you ask your director of the planning department to review the possibility of changing the boundary rather than providing specific exemptions. Thank you for letting us testify.
Thank you. Any questions of this speaker? Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Again, please state your name and address. And
yes, sir. My name is Dale Denison. I live at 125 38th Court, and I am a member of the Cornerstone Christian Church, which we're talking about. I don't pretend to know all the legalities and all the legal mumbo-jumbo here. All we're asking for is a quarter-mile of water provided to 3 people that are willing to pay for it: Shack Groves, the camp, and the church. When I moved here in 1973, the country was at 27th Avenue. We're talking about a property that's between 66th and 58th, 4-lane highways. And we're having trouble getting water? That seems a little ridiculous. 3 people have offered to pay all the costs to it. All we're asking for you to do is say yes, that we can run a pipe down there and get rid of our egg-smelling water and provide water for 2 other people that want water for their particular interests. That's what we want, if you will approve whatever. I agree with this lady here that if you can't give us an exemption, then maybe we should change the lines, because the city is not going to stay where it's at now, and the county water is not going to stay where it's at now. People on 66 at some day in time are going to want water. And that's just the way it is. It's going to grow, grow, grow. Thank you.
thank you, sir. Any questions of this gentleman? Thank you very much. Anybody else like to be heard on this matter? Okay. Oh, yes, sir.
One more. My name is Carter Taylor. I live at 2235 Silver Sands Court in Indian River County. I'm also on the executive committee of the Indian River Neighborhood Association. And as we're on the topic of amending the comp plan, Indian River Neighborhood Association has been discussing for several months a conspicuous absence in the comp plan for the provision of conversion of septic tanks to sewer and the extension of the sewer system to include septic tanks, particularly ones that were built prior to 1983 in the code change. And we call upon this board to support and the county commission to support an amendment to the comp plan to provide for some number. Presently, the comp plan does not envision any retrofits of existing septic tanks to county sewer, nor any of the impacts that might be caused by that. It seems to us that that is an extreme, large omission, an elephant in the room, I think somebody called it, that needs to be addressed in the comprehensive plan. And while we're talking about changing comprehensive plan in that chapter, we really ought to be talking about this as well. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Any questions, this gentleman? Okay, anybody else like to be heard on this matter? If not, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing, open the floor to discussion among the commission. Hearing none, I'll discuss a few things. I'm going to vote against this. I just think that, as I say, the reason why we're talking about a church and a camp/retreat is because those happen to be the properties next to this agricultural use. And I don't think that creating policy based on coincidences like that is good policy. And I think that once you say that, yes, we'll allow campgrounds and we'll allow churches outside of the urban services area to tie in, then you have basically opened the door to any type of use that's going to involve a gathering of people, or any type of property owner who wants to come in and says, hey, my use, I need fire protection as much as anybody else does, and you have created this slippery slope that you won't be able to stop at these two. If you truly want to expand or expand the exemptions, create an exemption for facilities which involve gatherings of people and which involve the need for fire protection and water and sewer, etc. Okay, take that issue up generally, decide if you want to go there, and then any uses that fall into that description, to my thinking, should be permitted. Or if you don't think that you want to open it up to all of those uses, you want to stand by the integrity of the urban services concept, then don't open it up to that group of uses. But to me, to open it up to a narrow piece of those uses, and only that narrow piece, creates something that to me is simply out of balance. That's my discussion. Any other discussion? Okay, do we have a motion then? The planning recommendation at this meeting is to amend the policies 5.7, I think it was, and 5.8 in the ways that have been described. Do we have a motion? Did you want to say something? Go ahead.
Again, the Planning and Zoning Commission could recommend its own, a different category, or give some recommendation to the board about opening it up to place of assembly uses generally. That's certainly within your prerogative.
And I'm, at least personally, hesitant to do that without that issue going through the planning process, through your department, as it should be fully vetted before something that significant comes forward, to me anyways. But in any event, we do have the recommendation at this meeting that's in front of us, and we can either vote to approve or recommend that the changes be made, or recommend that the changes not be made, or recommend that the changes be made in some other format. Do we have any motion that someone would like to put forward?
I don't know how to say it because it was what you said. Yeah, but I couldn't say that again. But it was to expand better define the use if you're going to open, right? If you're going to move it, define it better. Is that what you're trying to say? So that you aren't on that slippery slope.
Well, on the specific recommendation in front of us, at least my position is I would vote to deny it, or to recommend not adoption of that specific recommendation. And if the board wants to consider opening it to all uses of assembly, send that issue through the process, and again, let it be vetted. I'm not in a position at this point to say, yes, I think it should be open. Frankly, I'd have to take some hard convincing before I'd reach that conclusion. But again, we do have a specific proposal in front of us, and unless someone wants to recommend either approval or denial of something different from that specific proposal, then we ought to have a motion either to recommend approval or denial of that specific recommendation. The chair will entertain a motion either way, but I can't make a motion. I can't either. No.
Be happy to. Maria, did you want to make a motion?
No.
I'll move we deny.
I'll second that. I can second. We have a motion to, when you say to deny, to recommend against the proposal.
Yes.
Recommend, okay. Yes. We have a motion and a second. Dr. Day made the motion. I made the second.
Can you explain exactly what you're deciding? I'm not sure I follow.
Alan, if you want to take it or it's your call.
Pardon?
You're the chair, so I certainly don't mean to steal your thunder.
Dylan, I've not chaired any meeting at which I've heard you speak, so have at it.
Sure. The proposal on the floor was to modify, or not on the floor, but the proposal in the ordinance was to change the regulations, which would then allow for water and sewer service to be brought to be used by houses of worship, and the other issue was camps and retreats. That was to be applied countywide. Based upon the review and analysis that happened today, the motion on the floor was to recommend a denial of that proposal and essentially to keep the comprehensive plan as it is written now.
Okay.
Hold on, if we want, it's for the floor. I don't know if you want to open up discussion, Chair.
Well, I won't. Would you like to say something further?
Yes.
Okay, come on down.
If you're,
And keep in mind, we haven't made any decisions. All we've got is a motion on the
I
floor.
know, and I'm just trying to understand this. So your denial of the vote to not pass this is for a county ordinance. Is there room for an exemption for the three that are before you today?
Well, first of all we're doing is making a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. They will actually make the decision.
Okay.
Now, in our recommendation, the answer is no. There is not room for there is not room for the two of you, the church and the camp/retreat, to connect. The agricultural use already has a right under the existing comprehensive plan to connect.
Okay, so where does that put the other two?
Well, it puts the other two pretty much in the same situation as everybody else outside the urban services area.
Under the county umbrella.
Who doesn't fall within an exemption.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks for clearing that up.
Yes, sir. Okay, we do have a motion and a second. Do we have further discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor of the motion signify by aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Opposed? By like sign. Is anybody opposed to the motion? Okay, so we do have a unanimous vote to recommend non-approval or disapproval of the proposal.
Since this is a comprehensive plan amendment, of course, we would forward it to the Board of the County Commissioner with your recommendation to deny.
Thank you very much. Okay, and thank you to each of you who spoke tonight. Okay, the next item on the agenda is item 7, Commissioners' Matters. Do we have any? We do not. Next is planning matters. We have the information package. Anything further, Mr. Bowling?
Just two things, Mr. Chairman. Since your last meeting, the Board of County Commissioners did approve the rezoning at the southeast corner of Oslo Road and Old Dixie Highway, about 2 acres, going from CH to CG, and that was consistent with your recommendation. And also, this is the only meeting for December, so this is the last meeting of 2015. And we will be having a meeting, and we will need your attendance at the January 14th, 2016 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting.
Is that our organizational meeting?
Yes.
Okay, that will be our organizational meeting.
Right.
Okay, and I would just say to every member of the commission, if if anyone wants to be chair, I'll be happy to step aside.
Thanks.
So I don't want you to feel that, you denied an opportunity. So just keep that in mind as we approach our organizational meeting in January. Yes, sir.
And Mr. Chairman, one more matter. In the audience is Stephen Hitt. Stephen, would you stand up? He's our senior staff planner we've just hired for environmental planning. So he's working under Roland and already inspecting sites and looking at plans. So you may see Stephen in the future.
Could you just tell us a few sentences about yourself?
Sure. I'm born and raised in Florida. I live here in Indian River County in Sebastian. And went to undergraduate school in Melbourne at FIT. Did some graduate work in the Virgin Islands. And spent some time as a consultant, and now I'm with the county.
Well, very good. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Observe carefully Mr. Bowling and his staff because they do an excellent job for the county. Okay, next item on the agenda is attorney matters. Any?
Sir, I have no attorney items to bring to the
Okay.
board this evening.
We've reached the end of the agenda. Anything further to come before the board tonight? If not, the meeting's adjourned.